So let me take you back to the 70s, early 80s. That's when I was in junior high and high school. That's when I really got into guitar playing. This was the era of lots of guitars. This is when music was really good. Uh, and so these days I just play rhythm guitar, but back then I was playing lead guitar, playing guitar solos, and I devoted myself to this. In fact, I had planned that that would be my life, was to be a musician. I went to college for a year and then took a year off to travel, and in that process, that's when I felt the call into ministry, actually, and decided I did not want to do music full time. But for many of these years leading up to it, I was really into guitars, really into especially really cool guitar solos. All right, so Charlene and I are dating at the time, and she knows of my love for music. You know where this is going, don't you? I haven't told Charlene, but she remembers this story. So we're in the car at one point, and we're having this talk, and I think it was, I can't remember even the song. There was a particular song at the time that had a really cool guitar solo, right? And we're talking. She's like, "Oh, this is getting annoying." She turns it down. The best part of the song, she turns it down. That felt like a personal affront to me. You know how much I love this, and the fact that you are down on this thing that I love actually gets in the way of our relationship. That makes sense? So, what does this have to do with can we all just get along? Yeah, we'll come back to it. All right? So, Paul's teaching in the book of Romans, I talked about the first 9 verses last week, and that section clarifies the context here. So there's a note page if you want to fill in notes. There's actually quite a number of, this is a bit of an outline-oriented message, so follow along, I guess. But the background was that there were different issues, or rather there were different opinions about a couple of kind of key issues in the church at that time. And people had differing views about those, and so then they looked down on other people who had different views than they did. They judged other people, and they criticized other people. They talked smack about other people who had different views. And so that's what Paul is talking about here. And in that context, then, he gives, I'm saying instructions, but it's almost like commands. He's like, this is what you need to do. So the first thing is stop judging your brother or your sister. He said that in verse 4. We read that actually comes a couple of times. It's verse 10 and also again in verse 13. Stop judging this other person because they see things differently than you, because they do some things differently than you. You are accountable to God. They are accountable to God. They're not accountable to you. Mind your own business. Focus on your life, your relationship with God. Let that stuff go, right? Stop judging. Then stop treating them with contempt. Now, I have verse 4. I don't think it comes up in verse 4, but it comes up in verse 10. So, verse 10, Paul says, "You then, why do you judge your brother or your sister? Why do you look down on your brother or sister? For we will all stand before God's judgment seat." Now, I'm not sure. This is the New International Version that I'm reading, and I think it's actually translated that a couple of different ways over the years since they've had different editions of the NIV. Does yours say the same thing? Why do you look down on your brother? Because some translations also say, why do you look with contempt on your brother? Why do you have contempt for your brother or sister? So in other words, it's sort of like we sort of just fixate on this other person's problems or this other person's failings or how this other person isn't doing it right or doing what we think they should be doing. And how we're going to talk more about how dangerous and damaging that is, but Paul says stop doing that. And then finally, stop bringing others down. He comes back to that then in verse 13. Therefore, let us stop passing judgment on one another. Instead, make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in your brother's way, so that you're judging them, you're criticizing them, your sense of superiority and maybe gossiping about them or talking about them, it's creating stumbling blocks for people. It's bringing others down. Now, what I've tried to be really clear that this is a two-part message, and what I want to focus on today is to bring it in a little bit of a different direction. So last week we talked specifically about how this is a problem with divisions about beliefs and how we practice things in a different way. We see things in a different way, and therefore, because of that, there's then conflict and criticism and judgment. But I want to take it a different direction so that the issue is not simply being critical and negative and judgmental of others who see things differently than we do. But the bigger issue is just having a critical, judgmental spirit towards people in general. And so what I'm wanting to do is take what Paul is saying here about the particular conflict at that time, and I want to expand on it and think about what is he saying there, and how does that apply to our relationships in general, and how we respond and relate to each other in general, and how we respond and relate to the church in general. So the first thing that I want to say is, as we talk about this concern, this issue at Bethel, let's be very clear that it's not everybody, right? You've heard of the Pareto principle. Sometimes it's referred to as the 80-20 principle. And that states, it's this observation that if there's many causes for any certain phenomena, but it's often the case that a small subset of those causes are responsible for most of the things. So I think, like with churches, people would say, 80% of the work in a church is done by 20% of the people. When it comes to like habits and effectiveness and how you do your work, people will say that 80% of the value of what you do comes from just 20% of your efforts, right? So, like to study, to get good grades in college, 80% of what you learn can be accomplished in just 20% of the effort. But then you have to put more and more effort. Anyway, okay. 80% of the people in a church, 80% of the work that's done in a church often is done by a smaller group of people, by 20% of the people. 80% of the negativity and criticism and conflict and judgmentalism comes from this small group of people, from 20% of the people, all right? So that's what we have to be aware of in a church, that maybe a lot of us, we're doing well in this area. This is not an issue for us, but for some of us it is. And so we need to, each of us, search our own hearts to say, is this an issue in my own life, okay? Again, it's not for everybody. So some observations here. I believe, coming to Bethel, I've been here now just about 5 years. Been in other church settings. I believe this is a blind spot, and that this is an issue at Bethel, and that a lot of us don't even realize it, because we've been here a little while, and we just think it's normal. We think, well, that's just the way it is. People complain. People like look down on other people, and we don't all get along. We just criticize each other. That's just the way churches are. I suppose, yes. Can you just take it from someone who comes from the outside? There's a lot more of that here than I've seen in other churches. I'm just saying. Number two, um, this has been my experience and observation. I guess those two kind of relate. That's just what I've been saying. This is what I've seen and experienced. Some of you know this. We have people who are saying, I'm not going to be a leader again. I'm not going to be an elder. I'm not going to be a deacon because of all of the criticism, conflict, negativity that they encountered when they did it before. And you know, the sad part of that is a lot of those people are the best people for the job. It's those people who don't want to do it because they've, had bad experiences before. And the final thing I'd say is that this has been a problem for a while. This goes back. So before I came here, Les Kuiper was the interim pastor in 2018. Remember Les? One of the things that Les did is he got together with a group with members in the church, and I guess it's a little hard to read, but basically, in 2018, the fall of 2018, he got people together, and they had small groups, and he had them tell the stories about Bethel's past, and then in the context of then telling the stories, remembering the things that have happened at Bethel, then people talked about what their experience was like at Bethel, what was happening at Bethel, what's going on, what's good, what do we need to work on. So those listening groups, then he wrote a report, and this is how the report starts. In 2018, he gave, I think those are 8 bullet points, 8 observations from those listening groups. One of those was, again, it's sort of hard to read, but it says, there is a critical, judgmental spirit at Bethel, particularly expressed as a distrust for her leaders. And then he goes on in this report to give some recommendations, basically 2 recommendations. The main recommendation is to create a task force of people to work on this, and then the second recommendation is to vote on it as a council. But anyway, so the recommendation, this task force is going to focus on A, B, C, D, E, F. I think those things that they're going to work on. And one of those things they were going to work on was to help the church figure out how to nurture a graceful spirit of affirmation and encouragement instead of a critical, judgmental spirit. Now, here's the thing, let's acknowledge something. There's been challenges at Bethel because of some highly conflicted and very difficult leadership issues. Pastors having problems and then conflict because of that. It's almost, I don't think the word trauma is too much. It's a bit traumatic for Bethel, some of these experiences. And you guys remember, some of you were here, you remember how difficult those were, how traumatic they were, how divisive those issues were, and that they left wounds, and they left mistrust, and they left sort of relationship breakage or whatever. So when I came in 2019, we didn't have a task force. We decided to just focus on these things as a council. These were sort of our objectives that year. And we sort of worked on those. And then, of course, then what happened is COVID came and sort of disrupted everything. But these issues still remain. Now, why is this such a big deal? Why is this such a big problem? Because again, you might say, well, look, people have problems and conflict, and there's things they don't like about the church, and that's just the way it is. People complain, people gossip. Why is that such a problem? First, it's a problem because it creates a vicious cycle. It doesn't just go on, it gets worse. It's like, you've heard the term feedback loop. A certain a certain tone comes out on a guitar string, and then the sound comes out, and then because the sound comes out, it reverberates back, and then it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. That's how this works. It builds on itself. So here's the thing. I love this picture. You've maybe seen this meme. People on a bus, and the question is, I'm on this bus, which window am I going to look out of? I could be the guy and just sit there and look at the rocks the whole time and think, this drive is terrible. This is so boring. It's so monotonous. Hate this bus. I hate this drive. This is so boring. Or I could go on the other side of the bus and look out and just be amazed at the amazing creation that I see and the beauty there. Same bus. Depends which window you look out of. And I've talked about this in some things in this summer, that this is how life works. It was a message called 50-50, that we go through life and there's crummy stuff that happens. There's ways that people disappoint us, but then there's also good stuff. And there's ways that people surprise us at their grace and beauty. And so all throughout my life, then I have literally all throughout my life, literally every day, every minute of every day, I'm making this choice about what do I think about? What do I focus on? What do I talk about? What do I pay attention to? And the drive of my bus life, it depends on those choices I make about what I'm going to focus on. And let me tell you something. Here at Bethel, if you want to find stuff that's a problem, you will find it. If you want to find people who are jerks and who are not helpful and who are selfish or what, you're going to find them. If you want to find things that are wrong about me, that I'm not good at this or that I fail in that, you're going to find those things. You're also going to find ways that people at Bethel are amazing and how God's at work in powerful ways. You're going to find things that I actually can do okay. You're going to find things that are enjoyable about Bethel. You're going to find amazing things. And you have the choice, and I have the choice. I have the choice as a leader. I can focus on things that are frustrating me or problems, or I can focus on how the blessings that are happening and how God is at work, right? We all are making those choices all the time. Now, here's the thing. If you're looking at the wall all the time, okay, that's a bummer. Sucks to be you. Whatever. But now you grab the person next to you and you say, hey, look at this. And you pull them away from the wall, from the beautiful wall, and you point them to this and say, look at how terrible this is. See, this is just terrible. Now what you're doing is you're influencing them. You're taking them away from appreciating the good and the valuable, and you're sort of getting them to sort of see it your way. And then, of course, when they see it your way, now you commiserate together. And they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. That's just a bunch of rocks. Yeah, you're right. That person is kind of a jerk. Yeah, you're right. This is not a good thing, right? So now what you do is you're just building that. All right. So it creates a vicious cycle. It brings other people down. And that's what Paul's thing was here, right? You're putting a stumbling block in front of your brother or sister. When you are judging them, when you are criticizing them, when you are, or even, this is where I'm expanding it now, when you're just fomenting that kind of judgmentalism, that criticism, then you're just making it harder for other people. Proverbs 16 verse 8 says, a perverse person stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends. We could talk about this at length. There's a number of passages in the New Testament that contrast the way of the Spirit, the life of the Spirit in us, and the way of the flesh. And it's crazy because we have these lists of, sexual immorality and debauchery, and then in that same list is factions and division, right? So that divisiveness, that criticism, that critical spirit, is very much seen as part of that sin nature and very damaging. It brings leaders down. I mentioned that earlier. There are people who are like, I don't know that I want to do this because it's so onerous. It's so difficult because I just get exposed to so much negativity. Look at Hebrews 13. It says, have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. Do this so that their work will be a joy, not a burden, for that would be of no benefit to you. Now, I want to be really clear about something. Leaders have problems, and sometimes leaders need to be confronted, and sometimes leaders need to be challenged. Leaders need accountability. I know some people who are, or maybe were, Christian leaders who were narcissistic and abusive, and they love to quote this verse and kind of make everybody just submit, because you're supposed to submit to me because I'm the leader. You can take this too far, is what I'm saying. So we do need accountability, but at the same time, there is this reality that if people just complain a lot, people have a negativity, sort of, if that becomes kind of the dominant narrative that someone is hearing, it is of no benefit to you, guarantee it. So think of it this way. Actually, hang on a sec. So maybe you're like, okay, so what are you saying, Mark? I can't say anything negative? If I have a problem or a concern, that means I need to stop, and we can only have positive comments. We can only say good, nice things. I mean, that would be like weird and crazy, right? That would be like Stepford Wives kind of thing where you're just sort of taken over. So think of it like a spectrum, everybody. So on the one hand, there is the complaining, ultra negative. Everyone just focuses on problems, right? And then on the other extreme is where it's almost like cultish, where it's so positive and you can't say anything. There's no accountability for the leaders because we think that they are perfect and we can't say anything bad about them. And the health is somewhere in the middle, right? And what I've been saying is some of us have been too far on the low side, and that's what we need to work on. Finally, this is important because Jesus cares a lot about this. This is a big deal because Christ formed the church. Christ intentionally made the Christian life work in such a way that our Christian life is bound up in our relationships with other brothers and sisters in the church. So this is how we grow. This is how it works. John 13, Jesus said to the disciples, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples, if you love one another." And if we're just focusing on problems and criticism, if we're judging other people, if we're looking down on other people, we're focusing on how they're letting us down and failing, it's really hard to be loving. Ephesians 5 says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." Christ loves the church as passionately. This is an analogous to how spouses love each other. This is deep love that Jesus has for the church. Now, remember that story I was telling you earlier? I felt like Charlene is criticizing or not excited about this guitar solo, and I took that personally, like Michael Jordan would say, and I took that personally. So here's the saying: if you love somebody, you're going to care about what they love, right? If you really love somebody, you're going to care about what they love. Now, that's not a quote from Jesus, by the way. I put Jesus on this picture. That's just a principle, okay? I put Jesus in this picture because what does Jesus love? His church. What does Jesus love? the person sitting next to you, the person on the other side of the church that you don't get along with. Jesus loves that guy. Jesus gave himself up for this church, and so part of our commitment to Christ is challenged by, and it works itself out in our willingness to work with one another. So in Patheos, it's a website that's a lot of different writers. Grayson Gilbert said this. There's this phrase that sometimes people will say, "I love Jesus, but I don't love the church." And he says, "I love Jesus, but not the church," just means that you don't love Jesus. Because if you love Jesus, you're going to love what Jesus loves. Now, doesn't mean the church is perfect. Doesn't mean the church is easy to love. By no means. Okay, Charles Spurgeon, preacher from 1800s in England, he said this: "The church is imperfect, but woe to the man who takes pleasure in pointing out her imperfections." Now, somebody's got to point out their imperfections, and there's ways that we do that. And the church, we need that. We need criticism, and we need people to correct us when we're going down the wrong path, right? But notice, woe to the person who takes pleasure in pointing out those imperfections. And maybe I would add, woe to the person who points out those imperfections in ways that aren't helping anybody, but just making them look good by criticizing others. So I'm going to end with a qualifier, and I'm going to end with an invitation. All right, so the qualifier is, no, please hear this, no church leader is perfect. No church is perfect. And maybe that's too Pollyannish language. Every church leader is messed up. Every church is messed up. We are human. We are flawed. I have a lot that I'm still learning. Bethel has a lot that it needs to change in ways we need to grow. So we are not saying that you can't be negative and criticize because it's all good. That's not the point at all. The point is, how do we deal with that? So here's the invitation. All right. Consider today to be a line in the sand. We're going to get ready to start this new season, getting ready to launch Bethel with our updated vision. So let's think of this as a line in the sand. And because I'm a pastor, these are all going to start with P. I'm going to use some alliteration today. All right? So the first P, pray. Pray for the church. Pray for its leaders. Particularly before you talk to somebody else about someone's faults, talk to God about your perception of their faults. Before you commiserate with others about your disappointments with X, Y, or Z, spend some time praying about this, and you might see things differently in that prayer time. So pray for the church and its leaders. We need those prayers. Okay, number 2, and this is the huge one. So I keep on saying, okay, yeah, the church is not perfect, and there are times that we need to have a correction. That I, as a pastor, need accountability. But we need to figure out, how do we process those in a healthy way? And so one of the ways that happens is that we have a structure of accountability, right? So I, as the pastor, am accountable to the elders. So if you have a problem with me, you talk to one of the elders. And me, hopefully we could talk together. And as far as the church in general, we have the whole council for the church. If you feel like our church is not on the right path, then our church is part of a network of other churches, and so we can go to other churches in our denomination and feel like we can make sure that there's accountability for everybody. So there's a structure of accountability, and the elders each have, the deacons also have people that they are the sort of shepherds of. So that is a person you can talk to about any concerns that you have. Okay, so next, maybe you need to ask the question, is Bethel for you? If you look at this church and all you see is the problems and all you see are ways that it's not doing what you want it to do and whatever, maybe you need to go somewhere else. I would hate that, but rather you do that than to stay here and bring everybody else down. Kind of sounds like what is it, that Ozempic. Talk to your doctor whether Ozempic is for you. Talk about your doctor whether Bethel is for you. Anyway, but it's a serious issue, right? If you're going to be here, if I'm going to be here, I want to be here. And finally, prevent other people from spreading toxicity. So gossip dies in an environment where people say, I don't want to hear about that. Why are you talking to me about that? Talk to so-and-so about that. That's how this ends. You can make it end. If you're not a complainer, don't commiserate with other people who are. So, I don't know what else to say. So this may not have been your favorite message at Bethel, but it's and again, let me emphasize, it's not everyone's issue, but some people it is an issue, and we want Bethel to be not only a warm and welcoming place for newcomers, which it is, by the way. I always hear that when people come to our church, that they feel that warmth and welcome. We also want it to be a healthy place for people to grow and continue to grow as they are deeply involved in our work together. So we're going to take communion together as a reminder of our commitment and the gospel of forgiveness and reconciliation and new life that makes it possible for us to live in a different way.